Okay, we're a couple minutes past 12:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. It's always kind of like one of the precursors to spring hitting us is the fact that, the Tuesday gardening series is starting up. Um, we're at Renolda, we're actually starting this comprehensive future use plan that some of y'all might have gotten surveys. It's good opportunities to have a say in what we want to do in the future. But it made me reflect on the whole nature of our Tuesday gardening series was all built around when was the education wing habitable? Because, if you had ever been at one of the Tuesday gardening sessions in, say, April, and we had an 80-degree day, it was a little warmer in the education wing. We are working on trying to get a space to replace the education wing. We're working with the university on trying to get that, and it would be heated and cooled. So, this might give us a chance to take the education series and really spread it out throughout the entire year. So, good things coming. In that vein, obviously, we've got today's lecture. Next week, we've got the start of Rose Care Week. So, Georgia from the Winston-Salem Rose Society is going to give a presentation on growing roses. That Thursday and Friday, we also have the Rose Pruning Clinic. So if you're a little nervous about doing that first pruning of your roses, this is a great way to work alongside some people. And hey, as an added bonus, you help us because we have a lot of roses. And then March 18th, Joey is going to do a talk on hot peppers. And as a newly minted dad, you can expect more dad humor, and this time it's justified. David Zimmer is going to give a talk on March 25th about the waterways of Renolda. We're looking forward to this. It's been interesting, even just the work going on the property. If you haven't been walking around, Amy Dixon and her crew has really cleared out where the spring starts, so you can actually see the spring instead of a wall of ligustrum and honeysuckle and every other imaginable invasive blocking your view. April 1st, this is what I'm excited with because I'm going to drag him through the conservatory and pick his brain. We've got Carl Gersons, who oversees the conservatory at Longwood Gardens. He also, I keep saying, he has a deal with the devil because the man is traveling all the time, and Mexico, Ecuador, all these things, getting ideas, visiting gardens. But he comes up with these amazing displays at Longwood. So we'll have him here doing a talk on plants that pop, and this is using plants with colorful foliage. Really looking forward to that talk. Michelle will have her container workshop on April 8th. On April 15th, that will wrap things up with, we will do the plant sale preview talk. We've had to pivot because one of our deliveries was on a UPS truck that wrecked. And this was up north, so things sat in an unheated truck for a little too long. So we had boxes of mush. So we're having to pivot a little bit with some of our intended plants. One other workshop I want to point out is we do have a smartphone photography class led by Elizabeth Larson. She's done this before. If you want to get better about using your phone for doing garden photography or anything like that, this is a great opportunity. So, again, as usual, packed spring. I'm appreciative of all of our speakers, agreeing to come and present. And today we've got this is a second chance because we had last season, I think both our speakers coming and going got hit with sickness. But we're happy to have them here today. We've got Max Notke. He's owner and lead horticulturist at Bashavia Gardens. As most of us are, just has a passion for ecological, garden design. Their Bashavia Gardens does, many of you know this, does not only the nursery where they sell, but also just design services. And there's a great niche for that, as there is a growing demand for people thinking about their gardens not just being a pretty thing, that it actually has a function, and that we think about that as we're designing our garden spaces. Andy, I'm going to mess up your name because my memory. Zabit. I will remember it. It's like third time, fourth time. She is living in her new role as executive director of Keep Winston-Salem Beautiful. I'm looking forward to, what bringing new blood to that organization will be. And I'm sure she's got some great ideas of ways to get our community engaged about taking care of Winston-Salem. She leads efforts to promote environmental sustainability and community engagement. And I'm sure that's in no part funded by, or not funded, but encouraged by your own two little ones of getting, making sure we're leaving this place a better future. So enough of me talking. I'm going to hand it over to Max and Andy to give us a talk about introduction to ecological gardening. I'll hand here's y'all can pass it back and forth, or
what is it?
It's a microphone.
Oh, I knew that. I totally knew that. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Zabit, and I am the Executive Director of Keep Winston-Salem Beautiful. We are the local Keep America Beautiful affiliate. We are always looking for volunteers. We are a 501(c), and so we are also always looking for donations. If you have any questions or you want to get involved, my email's here, and I also have my card over here. Okay, well, that was cool. Okay, so Winston-Salem is a bee city, and what does that mean? That means that Winston-Salem has said that we are committed to reducing the amount of pesticides and herbicides that we use in our parks, and that we are working to create more pollinator-friendly spaces. One of the ways we're doing that is we purchased a steamer, and it doesn't just steam your clothes, but what it does is it melts the waxy cuticle on plants, and so UV rays kill it. So we don't have to use any pesticides or herbicides for that. We purchased that last year through a grant, and they're going to be rolling it out this year. So we're really excited for that. We also do Bee City events. We have a lot of events with Cobblestone Farmers Market and with Creek Week. Right now, we have a native plant exhibit at Forsyth Central Library through the month of March. And there's also a free native seed library to go with it. The Bee City USA, this is the framework. So we do public signage. We work a lot with the Audubon Society for that. Thank you, Audubon. We also have a committee that oversees this. That is the Sustainability Committee. So they look at things that they can do within the city of Winston-Salem to promote Bee City and also to create more sustainable practices. We have habitat enhancement projects. We do a flower bed program through Keep Winston-Salem Beautiful and in partnership with Forsyth Garden Club Council. And we are encouraging people to use natives in their beds to create more pollinator-friendly spaces. We are adding 4 new native beds this year. 3 of them are being built, and then 1 will be at City Hall in the median in between the 2 buildings. It's just dirt right now, and so we're going to plant that up with muley grass and goldenrod to really give it some pop. We also have educational outreach events, such as this. We also do things with Creek Week, and then a couple other speeches that we'll do with the libraries. Adopting a formal resolution. Ours was adopted in 2018, and that just means that City Council voted that they wanted to put this in place and make Winston-Salem a bee city. And then pesticide management policy. So that is making sure that when they are spraying, they're not broadcast spraying, they're doing targeted spraying, they're spraying at certain times to not interfere with the pollinators, and then also using that steamer that we have. We also have an adoption program where you can adopt a street, park, or stream. And usually it focuses on litter pickup, but we also encourage people to do invasive plant removal or just weeding in those areas. So if you're interested in doing that, please let me know. And then here are some of the enhancement projects that we've done. We do distribution events of native seeds. Like I said, we have the one at Forsyth Central Library right now. We support pesticide-free flower beds. So the pesticide-free beds that we will have this year is at Old Town, Miller Park, Fulton Park, and the Quarry Park sign, and then also the City Hall bed. We incorporated native perennials into city-managed garden beds. Like I just said, we're going to be planting up the median this year, and we will also plant the City Hall sign. The pollinator garden at Quarry Park, which was done by Sprig, that is a work in progress or work in process, and hopefully this year it will kind of fill in the area and start to look a little bit better. We passed the natural landscape ordinance, which means that you can take part of your yard or your entire yard and turn it into a natural landscape. There are some rules surrounding that. You have to have a 5-foot setback. It has to be a clearly defined space. But if you were interested in that, you can register, and then you get this cute little sign to put in your yard and let your neighbors know that you're committed to sustainability. We have a meadowing project that we're working on at Happy Hill. Does anybody know, has anybody been to Happy Hill Park? Okay, so you know it backs up to the Greenway. There is an acre space on the other side of that beautiful track that they built that we are in the process of killing, and we are going to plant with native plants. So we have plugs that we have ordered, and then we also have seeds. And our goal is to have a community planting day where we can invite people to come plant these plugs in the meadow so that everybody has a little sense of ownership in it. And then we will use a seed drill, which drills into the land and opens it up and then closes it back up nicely to do the interior of the meadow. So that will be happening hopefully this spring and summer. It's something that we have to work on because we have to make sure everything is killed there already, but we are remaining hopeful. And then the 2nd Street Park Native Landscape, if you are interested in doing the natural landscape area, Max did a beautiful demo garden at 2nd Street, and you can go there. We have beautiful signage that talks about what's planted there, and you can see what it would look like for you to do a natural landscape ordinance in your own yard. And then the support of the conservation easement at Long Creek Park. Keep Winston-Salem Beautiful. Like I said, we are the Keep America Beautiful affiliate. These are some of the things that we do. So we do plant giveaways. At Christmas, we probably get, I don't know, 2 million flower bulbs. We get 19 pallets of flower bulbs, and we hand them out in the community for free. We just ask people to bring a can of non-perishable food, if you're able, in exchange for a trash bag of bulbs. So we do that every December. As long as we continue to get the donation. We also do plant giveaways. Farmstead Nursery over on Peace Haven is a wonderful partner of ours, and they will give us plants at the end of the season, which then we hand out to people to plant in their own yards. We also have the adoption program, and you can see these wonderful little kids. They're cleaning up their adopted area. And then Community Roots Day, did anybody participate in that? Well, next year, I hope all of your hands are raised. It's super fun. We plant 100 trees in one morning. This year, all of the trees were native except for 15 trees, which is really big because previously we were planting crepe myrtles. And if I see one more crepe myrtle, I'm going to scream. We also did a persimmon class where we handed out free persimmon trees leading up to that. And that was really well received. So we're hoping to do that again next year. All of these things are posted on our Facebook, which is at the end. We also do the educational signage. This is an example. This is the bioswale at Washington Park, where the dog park is. All the water runs down into the bioswale and filters out all of the fecal matter before it goes into the creek. And now we have signage that talks about it. We also have a beautification brigade. We meet the 3rd Tuesday of every month. We do litter pickups. We'll do graffiti removal. We do plantings. We're working on doing some stream bank restoration at Rupert Bell Park. The creek there, we pulled out 26 bags of trash in an area probably half the size of this room, as well as piles and piles of lumber that people had dumped in there. So we're working on beautifying that area in the hopes that if people see something beautiful, they'll be less inclined to litter. So TBD on that. But if you'd like to be involved, like I said, the 3rd Tuesday of every month from 9 to 12, it's come and go as you please. It's very easy. I'll provide all the supplies. Sometimes I have snacks as well. And it's just a great way to get out in your community. We also have No Mo March, which I hope you guys have all heard of. It's kind of like marbles in my mouth when I say it. So it's No Mo March, not No More March. And we are asking people not to mow their lawn just so that all the pollinators that are overwintering in your leaves and in your lawn have a chance to get that early season pollen. There's not a lot of things blooming in March except for the weeds in your yard. And so it's really crucial that we provide that pollen for them so that they can get a head start. We're asking people to take the pollinator pledge, and that just says that you are committed to helping the pollinators in your yard. During this time, the city is going to be collecting the names of the people who do the pollinator pledge. I can't say that you're not going to get cited for that, but we are encouraging people to let their lawn grow a little bit longer and then resume mowing in April. And this is also a partnership with Piedmont Environmental Alliance and also Forsyth Audubon Society. And that is my portion, and now I'm going to turn it over to Max. Clap for Max. Yay, Max.
Thank you. This flips on.
Put it on the armadillo. No, I'm kidding. Put it on.
All right. Andy, thank you. Thank you all for having me. My name's Max Naki. I'm the owner of Bashavia Gardens. Quick little plug for the business. We were founded in 2019 by my wife and I in Pofftown. We focus on ecological garden design and landscape management, but we also do traditional gardening as well. And in 2023, we were able to expand our nursery operation to where now we offer retail plant sales. This is a slightly old slide, which I apologize. We do not have an online store anymore, but we do nursery appointments by appointment. We sell at Cobblestone in the spring and the fall, and this year we'll be actually selling at the big Piedmont Triad Farmers Market on Sandy Ridge Road. So we're very excited about that. Quick little background about me. I got a bachelor's of science in environmental science, and my first job out of college was working in a nursery, not a native plant nursery. I didn't even know what native plants meant, but it was my entryway into horticulture. We did landscaping, like mow and blow, kind of brute force traditional landscaping. And then I moved to Boston and started working in fine gardening and estate management, very much traditional gardening. And moving back here in 2019, we started this business with the goal of really infusing ecological and environmentally sustainable practices into what we were doing. So for this talk, my goal was not to do like another native plant talk, like instead of boxwoods, use native hollies or whatever, but to really focus on what I consider kind of like an umbrella term of which native plants is a huge part, and we'll be talking a lot about native plants, but that umbrella term is ecological gardening. And it expands beyond native plants to how you design the garden, how you interact with the landscape, and so forth. So my definition of ecological gardening is kind of regarding your landscape as more of a continuation of nature rather than something separate from nature, which was sort of the prevailing concept of a garden dating back to maybe like Victorian England. An example kind of on the left, lawns, hedgerows. It was a way to really control what I think was sort of still kind of unknown or wild or scary. In our human landscapes, we wanted to have control, and I think the way that a lot of traditional gardens have been kind of laid out and managed and preserved are from that. There's also probably a component of a display of wealth as well. So that kind of juxtaposed to something more on the right, where we're really embracing what nature is trying to do and using those processes to sort of guide them in a way where we can still have aesthetic appeal, but preserve sort of the ecological and environmental relevance of what would be more of a natural landscape. So a couple of goals for you all as home gardeners or someone who may be interested in home gardening. Two goals from this talk is to challenge previously held beliefs. For me, my little story arc as a gardener, I had to unlearn a lot of things that I used to do in the garden because that's how I was taught to do it. So for me, it's important to impart that if you're doing something and you're asking yourself why you're doing it, and the answer is just because this is how I've always done it, or this is how I learned to do it, then perhaps it's something worth sort of investigating. Why am I putting out mulch or pruning a certain way or whatever. So that's the first goal. The second goal is to start asking the question, what is the natural process that's occurring here? Nature as a system has been happening long before humans. And And so for us in our home landscapes to really kind of consider what's the broader trajectory here, or what's happening, and then how can I, as the homeowner, manipulate it or guide it in a way that it's going to achieve my aesthetic goals, but also still be really in step with what is already happening. As I'll kind of get into down the road, maintenance, as I kind of have started to define it, is really what you're doing to keep your garden in a non-natural state. So the further your garden is, or your landscape is from a natural, so like no one's out in Pisgah National Forest, like mowing grass or aerating or whatever. All of that stuff we have to do because we're trying to encourage what is a very non-natural kind of a landscape. So we'll do I'm going to do a quick little crash course on ecology and introduce a couple of ideas, and then we'll talk about home landscapes and how some of those ideas can be kind of applied. As this is an intro talk, it's going to be I could do probably a whole talk on every single thing we talk about today. So I'm going to try and do my best to really hit the big points and make sure that we get a good kind of starting place for everyone. So the first part of ecology is to consider where we live. Plant communities and animal communities, they don't really care about geopolitical boundaries. So for ecologists, when we're considering these communities, it's less accurate to talk about a North Carolina plant or a North Carolina native, and to think of it more into what we call ecoregions. So here in Winston-Salem, we live in the Piedmont ecoregion. It's a transitional region from the flat coastal plains of eastern North Carolina to Appalachia. Literally translates to foothills. It runs actually from about Birmingham, Alabama, all the way to New York. So it's broad, a broad region, and there's a lot of continuity in terms of plant communities and wildlife communities in this entire stretch. The soil in general is clay-based, which is fine-grained and moisture retentive, and we'll kind of circle back around to that a little bit later. And you can't really talk about the history of the Piedmont, at least since the 1500s or 1600s onward, without considering the impact of human development and occupancy. About almost 100% of the Piedmont at some point has been cleared for agriculture, cleared to build homes, burned to encourage grazing, et cetera. So there's very little, if close to no, sort of pre-human Piedmont land still. So one really important ecological concept that I want to talk about is the concept of landscape succession. Its definition is a vegetational change in which plant communities replace one another until a climax community is reached. So here, it looks like we had a conversion error or something. Those little question marks are supposed to be arrows. So here, kind of the flow chart has been cleared land for agriculture. Almost all of the Piedmont, or our area of the Piedmont, was entirely cleared for ag, and especially the early 20th century. And then transition into a Piedmont prairie plant community, followed by a pioneer forest, followed by an oak hickory forest. So pretty much all land, there are exceptions, but in general, all land here is trying to become a mixed hardwood forest. If humans disappeared this afternoon, you wouldn't see it tomorrow, but after After 5, 7 years, all of our lawns would start to have some woodies in them. After 15, 20 years, those would be juvenile trees of the pioneer forest, which are typically faster growing but relatively shorter lived trees, some pines, birches, sweet gum, and then eventually those would give way to what is the climax community here, which is a mixed hardwood forest, primarily oak, hickory, tulip poplar, maple. So it's important to kind of keep that context for all of our landscapes. And when thinking about our home landscapes, is odds are that's what your landscape is trying to do. Obviously, urban landscapes are heavily modified, but it's important to have kind of that framing while we're thinking about this. So just kind of like a little visual to show this. This is a photo I took in Brookberry Farm off of Meadowlark. Big development where they took cleared land that was agriculture and over the past 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 years been building a lot of houses. This was one lot that had been cleared but not yet built on. So you can kind of see like the beginnings of the meadow going more to a pioneer forest. You can see there's some broom sedge or broom sedge or blue stem. What's this? Oh, nice. Kind of there. And then here you can see like some pines or some oaks, et cetera, where they haven't been cleared more recently. This area is probably cleared 1 or 2 years before this picture was taken. You can see like some really tiny stuff. So this landscape is trying to become exactly what you see or in the back here, but we have what we call arrested the landscape succession, and that's by clearing the land or mowing the land. So just kind of a visual of a few different stages of this happening, and arresting landscape succession will be something that we visit a little bit later on. This is a photo I took on my property. About 30 years ago, there were areas where cattle were grazing, and up until about 30 years ago. So about 30 years ago, the cattle, for whatever reason, stopped coming, and it was a land use change, and my grandparents made the decision to let a lot of it just kind of go back to nature. So you can see, I put this in as kind of an example of the beginnings of a pioneer forest. There's birch, there's sweet gum, there's pine, faster growing, but again, kind of relatively shorter lived, 80, 100 years versus 200, 300 years plus of an oak or a hickory tree. And then you can see here where we are still mowing, where we've been arresting landscape succession. And that's kept it in an herbaceous sort of composition. You can actually see like there's some goldenrod here and there's some ironweed, et cetera. So we've kept it from becoming woods by mowing it, much like how by mowing our lawns, we're keeping a lot of our home landscapes from sort of being a part of this natural succession. So then I have this picture. This is an area on our property that was farmed up until the 30s or the 40s, so almost 100 years. And you can see how this has kind of become approaching more of a climax mixed hardwood community. There's oaks, there's hickories, they're really starting to dominate, while the shorter lived stuff is kind of starting to fall out. So just a visual to kind of help you all grasp the concept of what's the major driving force on landscapes here, and it's the land trying to become a forest. So now we'll transition to home landscapes. Going back to this picture, it's a mixed hardwood community. One important note about it is that it is stable. So that is with ecological landscaping, that's sort of our major, or one of our major goals is to reach landscape stability. By and large, naturally occurring plant communities have reached this equilibrium, and it's human interference that creates a disturbance that then sort of opens it up to invasive plants getting a foothold. So it's stable. It hasn't been touched in the better part of a century. It's also wildlife supporting. All the studies now about the importance of oaks, and we're really starting to find out that mature canopy trees are really the most important part of the ecosystem in terms of ecological, environmental support, pollinator support. I think 500 or maybe even 600 different species of Lepidoptera, which is moths and butterflies, use oaks as their host plants. So my thinking is like so much of nature is still unobserved to us. And so by respecting what really wants to grow here in masses, even if it's goldenrod, which a lot of times gets kind of hated on as being a weed, or erroneously hated on for causing allergies. That's actually ragweed, but it's these plants that the insects that naturally grow here have established relationships with. So the more that we encourage things that want to be here, like a mixed hardwood forest, or if you can't do a forest in your yard, a stand of goldenrod, or having little blue stem and broom sedge, which are major meadow grasses here. These are really what's doing the heavy lifting in terms of net ecological benefit, especially from a host plant and wintering site, and et cetera. So we'll contrast this is another picture from Brookberry Farm, right around the corner from that photo I took earlier. And this is sort of a personification, I guess, of the traditional American landscape, where we've taken this stable, wildlife supporting, natural, and done this, which is a lot of lawn, a lot of non-native shrubs. Excuse me. I'm not going to spend the entire presentation harping on lawns, but they're essentially ecological dead zones. They support usually thank you very much, 2 organisms or more if you have kids, but that's pretty much it. And they're obviously high input: fertilizer, water, aeration, seed. Again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about how much effort it takes to keep something that's so unnatural from the natural. Monocultures of fescue. There's no fescue monoculture plant community where you can go out in nature and find this. This is completely contrived. On top of that, we've got primarily non-native plants. The quick little side note, for those who aren't, super knowledgeable about like why native plants, I'll do it in the quickest way I can, most important way I can, which is, while you can get pollinator nectar support from non-native plants, we'll use butterfly bush as a great example. We still have clients who are like, I really want to support butterflies. Can you plant a butterfly bush in my garden? Besides it being invasive in some parts of the United States, not so much here, but it is not serving kind of the unseen important component of the insect life cycle, which is the larval host plant. So yes, you'll see butterflies nectaring on a butterfly bush, but no insects native to here lay eggs on a butterfly bush. And so this is the importance of the native plant utilization in our home landscapes. Is you're planting plants, not only are they adapted to the heat and establish more readily and all that good stuff, but insects actually use them. And of course, insects being kind of the foundation of all other life on Earth, supporting the insects is really the goal, the important component of what we can do with our home landscapes. So all that to say, again, we've taken this, put in this, not even using shrubs or trees that have any real relationships with any insects. They're essentially like plastic lawn flamingos in terms of their ecological relevance. And one other kind of note on the traditional landscape is we've set them up really as like individual plants with mulch around them, rather than a planting or a composition that we can think of kind of as one, which is more akin to nature. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. So again, I could do an entire talk on ecological design, but I'm going to kind of go over the basics. This is what I usually do whenever I meet a new client on their landscape, and what I would encourage you all to do if you want to do this in your home landscape. A bit banal, but obviously assessing sun, full sun, bright shade, deep shade. Not all shade is created equal. It depends entirely on the type of canopy trees. Some trees form a really dense foliar mat that light really can't penetrate, and it's a very deep shade. Some trees might have a higher canopy, a thinner leaf. Sunlight can penetrate a little bit better. It's a bright shade. I found that a lot of plant species that we sort of think of as full sun meadow plants are actually in nature more like open woodland plants. And so kind of teasing apart those differences can really help with plant selection on a site. You know, there's so much more to it than just looking at the tag at the nursery and it says, oh, full sun, this needs to be in full sun, or it won't do well, etc. And we'll go into some resources for you all. I'm going to try and teach you all the fish today rather than giving you all a fish today. So I'll be giving you some resources to really look up these plant communities and species that naturally grow in certain site conditions. Assessing soil. When I'm on a new site, I'm less interested in necessarily a soil test and more interested in assessing soil structure. You know, is this a sandier, really freely draining soil? Is this a more compact clay soil, but more of like an undisturbed soil? Or is this like post-construction backfill, like heavily compacted, very unnatural soil that not much will grow in? Because again, that's going to drive plant selection. I'll get into this a little later, but I've moved away from tilling or even really amending that often. Our goal really, when we're doing ecological design, is to let the site drive plant selection and not trying to change the site to sort of be this catch-all garden where we could grow anything in, which is sort of the traditional mindset. I'm always looking at existing species, obviously invasives, which are something that will always be a long-term problem on a site and something that you'd want to create a management plan for, but also what plants are already doing well. I've found observing what species are on site and doing well to be a much better indicator of what else would do well on the site, rather than a soil test and so on and so forth. So I'm always trying to see, oh, this particular species is doing good. I know that this other species also grows with this plant in nature. So that would be a good candidate for introduction onto this site. I'm also trying to identify open bed areas. I almost always recommend to homeowners to really focus on established bed spaces before just like, even if that patch of English ivy's like keeping you up at night, rather than diving in there and just ripping it up and creating a disturbance, which I've already mentioned is sort of the catalyst for landscape instability, to really just focus on where you already have open bed space. I'll get into it a little bit later, but in ecological landscaping, there's a concept of trying to get complete vegetative cover. Rather than using mulch, really letting the plants be the green mulch and fill in as much open space as possible. So to that end, identifying where you already have open space rather than trying to create more open space. I always recommend focusing on small areas, really trying to get those areas to a relative stability and then moving on to other areas. Based on all that stuff, those assessments, the next question is what naturally occurring plant community can we kind of use as inspiration for this site? Again, the question marks are supposed to be arrows, but if it's a house in the Buena Vista neighborhood with a lot of mature canopy trees, obviously competitive root systems that are going to make plants that aren't site suited more difficult to establish, I'll look at an upland hardwood forest plant community. If it's a yard in Ardmore that's in full sun but is at the base of a hill and you get all your neighbors' water, I'll be thinking of it, and the water stays there standing for a day or so after it rains, I'll be thinking more of a wet meadow plant community. And same if you have like willow oaks with a smaller leaf, but a very high, a high canopy, it's been limbed up over the years. Then maybe like an open woodland or a meadow edge. But the crux of it, the pith of it, the important thing is really to let the site drive plant selection rather than trying to manipulate the site to sort of suit this like idea of what the garden wants to be. I mean, a cottage garden or a meadow doesn't want to be under mature oak trees. So rather than trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, it's really the shift in mentality to let's appreciate what the site is giving me and let's really try to pick plants for that site. When plants don't do well on a particular site, I don't really curse them. I curse myself for being a bad ecologist and a bad horticulturalist and not picking the right plants. Because the plants are doing fine without us out there and have been before we were here. One other kind of important thing from the outset of design is establishing a long-term landscape vision. Again, this is going back to the idea of succession, where pretty much everything's trying to become a forest, right? So this is a garden we planted 3 or 4, or maybe even 5 years ago at this point. It's by the Moravian Music Archive by Old Salem. This is God's Acre right over here. And the client who kind of commissioned this, she wanted it to be a meadow or a meadow inspired right by a really hot parking lot, not readily available water. So I picked a very drought tolerant plant palette, and in order to keep it in this meadow phase, we cut it back every year. We weed out any woodies that show up. But that's pretty much it. The plants themselves now have filled in to where there's not really any room for weeds to get established. Occasionally there's this Ilex crenata, it might be cornuta, Chinese holly. still pops up sometimes, but by and large, the plants themselves are doing the weed suppression. The plants themselves, they don't need any supplemental water. So all we're really doing is just cutting it back to kind of arrest the succession in this meadow phase. So I say all that and show this to illustrate the idea of thinking, this is what the landscape wants to do long term. How can I keep it in this certain mode that I want it to be, or maybe I'm fully embracing the fact that it wants to become a forest and I'm just selectively thinning certain species out, etc. The nice thing, or maybe the frustrating thing about gardens, about landscapes, is they're dynamic. They never really stop growing, or changing, and so respecting that from the outset's important. This is another. I put this in here to show kind of like some microclimates and tailoring plants really for specific areas on a garden based on the site conditions. So here, kind of where I was standing when I took this photo, afternoon sun, we kind of went with like a meadow edge palette, but you can see at the end of the walkway here, there's a river birch, which if any of you all have river birches, they're extraordinarily competitive for water. And it can be really hard to get stuff established underneath them. So underneath there, we went with more of an upland woodland, plants that are really adapted and can commingle with tree roots that are really competitive for resources. So we have Christmas fern, Carex albicans, which is white tin sedge. It's a very drought-tolerant sedge that we use a lot. There's white wood aster. I think, there's columbine, some woodland goldenrod, species that naturally occur in upland woodland gardens. So just a little illustration of really tailoring plant selection to what the site is presenting. A few other ideas of ecological design, kind of going back to what I was saying with vegetative cover, is utilizing a functional layer. And this is really kind of take the place of, in traditional landscapes, what we'd use as mulch. And this is particularly important on sites that have a very high weed pressure. Some sites have invasives. There's a lot of viable seed in the seed bank. You never feel like you're done weeding. And so especially in those kinds of sites, utilizing this functional layer is a tactic that we use as part of the design process to help us reach this long-term landscape stability. So this particular property, there's a lot of water runoff here, and this whole area always had Japanese stilt grass. And for a year or maybe even two, we were like periodically just weeding the Japanese stilt grass, and it would always come back. And so finally, I was like, we need to do a different tactic here. So we introduced golden ragwort, Pachyra, great native plant, very competitive, but here that's what we wanted. So we introduced Pachyra, and I don't see any stilt grass here anymore. We encouraged the Pachyra, we removed the stilt grass, and eventually now this is in April or May, we have this really beautiful yellow bloom, blooms at the same time as Tiarella, as you can see, is growing back there. So it's a nice aesthetic combo as well. So again, just an illustration of letting the plants themselves really do the heavy lifting for us. One kind of thing that comes up again and again is how surprised clients are with how many plants that I want to use in a new planting form. And this again is really inspired by what happens in nature. If you go out and look at a meadow community, in a square foot, there'll be 5, 7 plants coexisting in 1 square foot. In the traditional gardening mindset, it's like you read the tag, oh, this echinacea, 24 to 36 inches. Let's space them all perfectly like that. Again, kind of contrived and not really consistent with what happens in nature. Nature is very effective at filling in open space with plants, usually in the home landscape with weeds. So to combat that, to reach this long-term stability, we plant plants densely. Sometimes a foot spacing, sometimes a little bit closer, really kind of driven by budget, driven by how much weed pressure there is, how fast we want it to fill in. But something that's a little different from sort of, or contrasted to the traditional garden mindset. Kind of an extension of that, this is a picture from the Public Services Building in Kernersville, which we've been doing maintenance at for, I think, 5 years now. If you all haven't been to it, it's pretty cool. They've done like this massive native planting. Most of it is sort of a traditional layout, but like sub-in native plants for non-native plants, still like long lines of shrubs, but with mulch in between. And it's a really great contrast for me as an observer to see that versus this area, which is like the one area that the higher ups have kind of been okay with being wild or naturalized or weedy, as they call it. And this is a bioswale that is sort of just allowed to do its thing. And this photo is taken later in the year. You can see obedient plant, cutleaf coneflower, ironweed, pretty competitive plants, stuff that you would maybe read are too aggressive for the home garden. But it's a great contrast to see how much time it takes to keep the mulched, more traditional areas weeded and looking good versus this area where we've allowed the competitive plants to do their things, the natural process to occur. We probably spend, we have a team out there once a week, all year long. We probably spend 8 or 10 hours a year maintaining this part of the garden. So just kind of a contrast of embracing this dense vegetative cover, using the plants as mulch, allowing what nature wants to do on a site. Talked about it earlier, but plant selection with ecological gardening is really paramount, making sure we're picking plants that we think will be matched from a culture standpoint to the existing site. I already kind of did my native plant spiel, but again, of paramount importance for a net ecological gain to use plants that have interactions with insects and wildlife that grow here. I put in the milkweed, that's like the poster child of this interaction. Monarchs only lay eggs on milkweeds. And there's a little monarch butterfly in the nursery on a butterfly weed, as if nature says, here's a perfect example. I kind of already covered this, but again, if it's a site that has ivy already, or oriental bittersweet, or some of crabgrass, some of these really problem plants, trying to use plants that are, I'm not going to say aggressive, but social. Mountain mint, blue stems, goldenrods, bee balms, excuse me. And then whenever possible, using local ecotypes. Our nursery's trying to transition as much as possible to locally collected species that have been grown from seed. Allison Northrup, who owns Piedmont Plants Nursery in Rural Hall, she opened last year. This is exclusively what she's doing, which I'm very admirable about. So check her out if you all haven't. but everything she is growing is from seed collected from local population. The benefit being, again, so much of nature is unobserved. To me, this is a safe bet. You know, we're using plants we know grow here naturally. We know have interactions with insects here. Little blue stem, major meadowgrass of the Piedmont is in all but two states of the continental United States. So a little blue stem in Texas versus a little blue stem in Minnesota versus a little blue stem growing on the side of the road here in the Piedmont, they're all going to be very different genotype and phenotype. So important, it's really catching on with nurseries to use local ecotypes as much as possible. Okay, swinging into garden management, we'll cover a few things kind of briefly. A big one that has gotten a lot of press is leaving leaves. It's a natural mulch. It provides organic material, but it also encourages fungal, mycorrhizal relationships with roots. There's a lot of research coming out now about all that's happening kind of unseen to us. It provides cover for insects. And the more I've transitioned from traditional gardening to ecological gardening and really embraced the natural, I've come to find that mulch really and pine straw really look kind of fake to me. When I have a woodland garden, the stuff poking through the leaves, trillium or woodland phlox or whatever poking through leaves provides much more of a sense of place. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but again, from a maintenance perspective, leaving leaves is a lot easier than paying someone to blow them all out and then paying them to come back and put out mulch, which the leaves were doing that anyway. Another traditional gardening management technique that I learned and then had to unlearn was deadheading. Seed heads are an important food source. We've all, or most of us, have seen goldfinches on Echinacea. Those two species definitely have some kind of a relationship. But going back to the idea of naturalizing, we want to encourage plants to self-sow, especially plants that is their primary way of persisting on a landscape. Even plants that are listed in a nursery as perennial, not all perennials have the same lifespan. We'll go back to Echinacea, perennial. We all know it as a perennial. A single Echinacea's lifespan is like 5 or 7 or maybe 10 years. It's not a super long-lived plant. The way it persists on a landscape is by self-sowing. So if you plant Echinacea, you want it to persist on the landscape, you have to let it go to seed, you have to let it disperse its seed. Seed stems are also serve as overwintering sites for some insects or laying sites for some insects. And there's also a component of winter interest. It's a goal that a lot of clients have. And a lot of times it's framed in like I want something that's evergreen or has a pretty color, a red twig dogwood or whatever in the winter. But I've really come to appreciate sort of the architecture, the decay, the seed heads of a garden as much as the actual flower. And when you're talking about perennials that only bloom for 4 or 6 weeks and then are just there for the rest of the year. Picking plants that do have a good architecture, do have interesting seed heads, can really add a lot more dynamic aesthetic interest to a planting. There's some plants that I use in gardens that I don't even love the flower, but I really like the seed heads. Here's a couple of poorly scanned photos from a book. These are both gardens designed by Pete Udolph, who designed the High Line, designed the Lurie Garden in Chicago. He's one of the forefathers of modern day perennial garden design. And one thing he really embraced and really pioneered in a lot of ways was embracing this fall winter decay of gardens. His gardens are actually like most interesting at this time of year. Sets a mood. Here's some echinacea, Amsonia, which is native. So just a little illustration of there being still some mood, some interest to gardens beyond just like my coneflower's done flowering, now it just sits there, etc. A couple more, excuse me, a couple more quick little topics, kind of going back to what I was saying about not trying to manipulate landscapes to accommodate every plant, but rather just pick plants that fit the landscape. Not amending or tilling or fertilizing or, adding compost. When I was in gardening, I learned that every garden bed needed to be sort of prepped, tilled. You got to add compost in, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to remember that the plants that grow here naturally were doing just fine before humans came into the picture. And a lot of times that clay soil is almost a reproductive advantage for them. They're adapted to this soil while other weeds or invasive plants can't do as well. Obviously a broad statement, but a lot of times when you go in, you do this disturbance of tilling, you add in compost, you make the soil really fertile. You're almost selecting by doing all of that for weed seeds or invasive seeds that might be latent in the landscape. So there's an exception to this, which is like post-construction sites. If it's a new build and the soil is heavily compacted and very unnatural, we will kind of try and work it up a little bit and get a little more porosity in it. But by and large, I try and, again, really pick the plants for the site. Another kind of long-held garden idea is like needing to water perennial gardens every, weekly or twice a week. When we plant a new garden, obviously there's an establishment period. The plant's been in a plastic pot in a nursery where it was getting watered for 3, 4, 5 times a day. Now it's not. So yes, there's a supplemental watering to get stuff established. But once these plants that are adapted to our climate here are established, blue stem can grow roots down to 12 or 14 feet. It grows out in the plains where it rains once a month. It grows down in Florida where it rains a lot more often. It's adapted, especially the ecotypic ones here, they're adapted to our rainfall. There's always an asterisk if we have a June like last year where it didn't rain for 4 or 5 weeks. That was an uncharacteristic drought, but in general, a lot of these plants will sometimes go into like a semi-dormancy. So all that to say, they're adapted to our natural rainfall, and by adding all this excessive water, again, sometimes you're almost selecting for garden weeds. I've already kind of mentioned this, but minimizing disturbance is another sort of tenet of how I interact with landscapes in an ecologically minded way. Again, disturbance is a catalyst for landscape instability. So in any situation where we can interact with the landscape in a way where we're minimizing that is always a goal for me. One tactic we use a lot for invasive control specifically is cutting and treating with a concentrated herbicide. It's an environmentally benign way to apply herbicide. It's the only herbicidal application strategy that Rachel Carson of Silent Spring sort of put her stamp of approval on. And oftentimes that can be a much more effective way long-term to handle invasives versus mechanical removal. As fun as it is to tie a chain around a tree stump and try and yank it out with a tractor, a lot of times that disturbance is destabilizing the landscape further, especially if you're on a riverbank or a hill slope or erosion's an issue. Okay, that was kind of all the topics that I wanted to cover. I did want to mention a few resources, and then I have a few books down here that I was just going to go over really quickly. They're books that have been really helpful for me in my kind of transition from a traditional gardener to ecologically minded gardener. The first one, online resource that I really like is BONAP. This website will show you the range map for every species that grows in North America. So I use this a lot if I'm researching a new plant, I'm thinking about using it. I'll look at this and see, okay, are we at the bottom of its range? Are we at the top of its range? Are we in the middle of its range? Does its range seem to skew more towards the coast? Is it in the Piedmont? And it just gives me an idea of where this plant grows naturally. And of course, as it gets hotter and plants migrate northward, I try to pick species that were not at the southern tip of their range. Those species in the future probably won't be able to handle hotter, drier conditions than where they are right now. So this to me is almost more helpful than just looking at the zone numbers. Vascular Plants of North Carolina is a super great resource. It's basically BONAP, but just for North Carolina. It shows a county by county distribution of plants. So you can really see, like, is this just grow down on the coastal plains where it's hotter and generally sandier soil? Does it just grow up in the mountains where it's cooler? Or is it a species that is a generalist and grows everywhere? Or is it a species that seems to be Piedmont specific? And there's also really great information on this website with habitat. So this can really help kind of clue you into to what plant communities plants belong to, and again, help with sort of picking the right plants for the site. Missouri Botanical Garden, these two resources are kind of more ecologically geared. Missouri Botanical Garden I really like because it's more home gardener geared. It's a great resource for native plants and how they behave in the garden. There's a little bit of information on how they naturally occur, but this is also a nice resource because the Missouri Botanical Garden is in St. Louis, which has a similarly hot and humid summer. So a lot of times I will be researching a plant. I'll go on there. They'll say, summers are too hot, really, for this plant to be productive long-term. And I'll say to myself, okay, it's probably not going to do great here either. So those are the online resources. A couple of books that I've found really helpful. If you all are interested, we'll kind of start with more ecology-based. This is Weekly's Guide to Wildflowers of the Atlantic Southeast. It's I encourage you all to get out in nature as much as possible and observe what's actually happening out there. This really helps with identifying plants, and there's information on where they commonly occur. This book is probably the most important book that I've read in terms of like my gardening trajectory. Larry Weiner is been a big proponent of native plants for almost 3 decades. He still does garden design, but now his primary focus is new directions in the American landscape, which is another great resource. If you all have never been on that, they do classes for homeowners. that are all kind of ecologically focused, native focused classes. But this book was a great sort of like ecology crash course and how it can be implemented into our home landscapes. And a lot of the ideas, concepts from here, I learned from Larry. This book is a really good one. It's kind of like an intro to gardening book if you're kind of just getting started. Intro to ecological or native plant gardening book if you're just getting started. You can see one of my dogs really liked it too. Roy Diblick is a garden designer and also a nurseryman in Wisconsin. I really like this book because it has a lot of templates to kind of help with layout. If that's something that's kind of daunting to you, this can give you an idea of how to lay out gardens in a way that are sort of ecologically influenced. So that's why I like that one. This is one of Talamy's books. Obviously, he's a heavy hitter. I really like this book because of the appendix specifically. It lists pretty much every native plant you'd ever want to use in your garden and lists ecological function, which is a really nice resource. Larval host plant, overwintering site, food for birds, nesting site, etc. And then finally, the late Larry Mellencamp's book, Native Plants of the Southeast. This is kind of a great, if there's thousands of plant species out there, I think he whittles this down to like 400 something that he sort of thinks are the most garden worthy. And he's even got it kind of like a star system where 4 stars is like every garden should have this. 1 star is like cool plant, but maybe for the back 40 or whatever. So this is another really great resource and has some habitat and range information in it as well. Okay, I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm glad I'm kind of wrapping it up here. Does anybody have any questions for me? I'm sorry, can you say that again? My hearing's not great. The way I'm seeing it the most right now is in spring and fall and really interesting swings in temperature. Not so much this spring. This has actually been a very late spring. But in past years, having a 70-degree day in February or January and some plants starting to break dormancy, like and the plants themselves, these nighttime temperatures or these stretches of cool temperatures kind of like tricks them into growing or not growing. So like I've been seeing goldenrods that are like blooming in April or asters blooming in April. So it's really like these strange fluctuations. I think we'll also start seeing and have been seeing, especially last year, longer periods of drought. Last June, when it was like a heat dome or whatever was over us, and it didn't rain for, on our property, almost 6 weeks, I was seeing mature trees, canopy trees that were starting to wilt. So that will be, that's what I've kind of observed so far, and I'm sure the summer will be longer and et cetera. Any other questions? Yeah, it's a great question. Insects specifically are very cyclical, and I've kind of found, especially on our property where I do very minimal kind of manipulation of the landscape, except in specific areas around the house, I found that the more you're sort of encouraging wildlife and encouraging insects, you start getting more biological controls, like we have bats on our property, and I'll see one mosquito a year because I think the bats are helping to control them, and so it's similar to that. These surges of insect populations are natural occurrences, and the plants are adapted to maybe be eaten to the ground one year and then come back. One thing I also tell clients a lot of times is insect or fungal issues on a plant, to me, is more of a sign that, or can be a sign that the plant itself is stressed out, whether it be from heat or drought or not being sited correctly. Plants like us have immune systems that can usually fend these things off. So when I see a fungus showing up, my initial reaction isn't so much like what herbicide or what fungicide can I use to combat this. It's more like what is going on with the plant, that it's stressed where this is now having an opportunity to attack it. Going back to last year when it was a very stressful June, I can't tell you how many properties where we saw like fungal or insect issues that I'd never seen before. I think just because the landscape was so stressed from how hot and dry it was. We usually use concentrated glyphosate. So if you apply it, which is Roundup, which if you apply it by the label rate with gloves and wear the proper PPE, I don't like glyphosate at all. But the benefit of painting and treating it is that it's not entering into any systems. Yeah, we use like a little paintbrush, or you can even, I think they package it now as stump or brush killer, where it comes with like a little paintbrush. And the goal with the most important component of that is using a systemic herbicide that will actually get into the vascular system of the plant so that it draws it into its roots and kills it. So I went through a period when I never used herbicides. Now it's a tool in the toolkit if they're used properly and the right way. All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I forgot I have this one.
One other tool to look into. Sorry. Let's go. Look at Mount Cuba in terms of resources, because they do a lot. They are a botanical garden up in Pennsylvania that they are focused on natives, but they do really hardcore research of, they will look at echinacea and get every echinacea that's been selected, evaluate them, look at them, not just beauty, it lived. They're also now looking at ecological